you. Thank you, Anastasia. Yeah, I'm very honored to be here, and then thank you very much for this kind invitation. Today, I'd like to talk about the question of this relation between maize agriculture and public performance, and then the nature of political authority. Classic period, which is about the 3rd to the 10th century AD. And as you see, maize, here we see is the maize god dancing. So in this way, maize agriculture play important role economically and then also ideologically. And then public performance, again, very important. And then the rulers really danced and then performed in front of large audience, like in this manner. So Maya rulers were very visible figures. And then this kind of direct interaction between the rulers and then community members, a very important part of political processes. Then, so this cultural complex of maize agriculture, public performance, and then political authority was not a timeless entity. They were shaped in a specific historical processes. Then in this sense, important changes happened, I think, around 1000 BC. That's about this period. That's a time we call the beginning of the middle Preclassic period. And I've been studying this topic through the excavation at the site of Ceibal, that's in today's Guatemala over there. So at this site of Ceibal, what we found was the evidence of really the elaborate public ritual and then the construction of temples dating to about 1000 BC with this kind of ritual offering. But before that, during the period that's called the early Preclassic period, we don't really have many archaeological sites. Most of data come from Belize, and then they show that those consist of just this kind of spearheads or spearheads. Then people are just doing a mixed economy of hunting, gathering, fishing during this period before 1000 BC. Maize agriculture, well, maize cultivation existed, but probably was very small part of subsistence. Then, really around 1000 BC, there was a major social change, also change in subsistence. The important part of this change was probably this development of maize agriculture. And then with that came more sedentary way of life. But when we look at this question, we also look at general broader context of interregional relations. When Ceibal was developing during the middle Preclassic period, there was a big center of Venta of Olmec civilization, who was already building this kind of colossal head. Clearly, there was very well established rulership during that period at the center. Even before that, before 1000 BC, when Maya people were running around the jungle, Olmec people are already building a major center of San Lorenzo, and then building already this kind of colossal heads. So we have to think about this relation, and then there has been lots of debate among Maya archaeologists whether the origin of Maya civilization really started with the influence from Olmec civilizations, or whether Maya civilization pretty much developed locally, almost in an independent manner. So let me first give you a general overview of my argument. So around 1000 BC, there was a major change that involved in the change in subsistence and then change in public ceremony. With that came change in what might be called domestic spheres and then public sphere, and then which shaped the nature of community and the nature of political authority. Then when we talk about public sphere, important theory came from, of course, Jürgen Habermas in this book, The Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere. Habermas was talking mainly about the European history. And then, according to him, the public sphere was historically shaped social field that conditioned the possibility of people's political engagement. Then he says that in Europe, around 16th century, public sphere detached from private sphere emerged. And then he says, during this period, public sphere was pretty much overlapped with the state. But then around 18th century, a public sphere separate from the state emerged. So the public sphere was a place where bourgeois civilians gathered and debated the matter of the state. So that was separate from the state. Then the important message here is the public sphere is not a universal entity. It's specific to certain historical processes and circumstances. So then we have to analyze public sphere in a specific historical context. So I drew this inspiration from this general theorization of Habermas, but also I get very frustrated about the certain aspect of his theory. There has been lots of debate about the theory, Habermas's theory, but for us archaeologists, the major problem is the statement made by him that during the medieval period, there's no public sphere. So in this manner, basically, Habermas is dismissing pre-modern world as essentially apolitical. But of course, we archaeologists think that there was important political processes in those societies. So this problem in conceptualization of Habermas came partly from his overemphasis of language. But we think, I think that the important political processes, negotiation in pre-classic Maya society and then many other society probably happened not necessarily in this conscious discursive debate, but in less conscious bodily interactions, which may happen in those settings of public performance. So what I think is that the 1000 BC in Maya society was the time this domestic sphere and public sphere separate from each other were emerging. And then public ceremony was important setting of this public sphere. And then this configuration of the domestic and public spheres very much conditioned the development of political authorities in the following centuries. So let me now talk about archaeological data. So we've been working at the site of Seibal. As you may know, this site was originally studied by Harvard University, directed by Gordon Willey in the 60s. And then we revisited this important site in 2005, and then we've been working since then. At the beginning, let me talk about this broader context, particularly relation with Olmec civilization. What I'm going to argue is that really Maya society didn't really develop under the direct influence of Olmec civilization, but it was not a completely independent development. Actually, this interregional interaction was very important part of this process. So we're going to look at the center of La Venta in Olmec area, and then also other centers in the intermediate area, particularly this center of San Isidro and Finca Acapulco. So this is the site of San Isidro. What's interesting about this center is that in the center, you have this very standardized, we'll see that that's very standardized form of of construction, which is generally called E group, which consists of western square building and then eastern elongated building. So this part. And then you have those big platforms arranged along the north-south axis. If you see the Olmec capital of La Venta, we see the same pattern. In the center, you have the E group, and then the building platforms are again arranged along the northeast axis. John Clark called this pattern middle formative Chiapas pattern because this pattern is found in many other centers in Chiapas. So this similarity is not just about the superficial similarity of building. It was probably tied to specific ritual practices because we found specific ritual deposit, particularly along the center line of E group. At San Isidro, they found this cruciform cache with greenstone axis. La Venta, they haven't done excavation in the E group, but in the northern part, they found many caches, again, in cruciform with those greenstone axes. Then, when I went to Ceibal, we had that kind of pattern in outside area in mind. This is the map of Ceibal. Ceibal is located on this steep escarpment next to this Passion River. And then here, the main part is Group A. That's where Harvard people found early occupation dating to the Middle Preclassic period. Then this is the important focus of our research. This is the map of Group A. So this represents the final form dating to 900 AD or so. But looking at this form, I thought this is similar to Chiapas pattern. I thought that probably they made this organization at the beginning, following Chiapas pattern. In the center, you may have E group, and then big platform may be arranged north-south axis. So the main focus of excavation was to test this hypothesis that they had this arrangement from the very beginning. So these red square shows our excavation area. First, we looked at this area in the central axis of E group. Looking at Chiapas pattern, we thought that there may be caches in this place. So we dug there. My co-director, Guatemalan co-director, Otto Roman, was digging there. And then he went through many plaza floors and then went down 2.5 meters or so. Then he said he had bedrock. So that's bedrock. So I said, where is my cache? And Otto says, there's no cache. So we checked the bedrock, whether there's any intrusion, but we didn't see it very well. So I said, what the hell, just dig the bedrock. So Otto started to dig bedrock. And then a few days later, we found this beautiful cache with those greenstone axes. So what happened was that when they built this center, they scraped the surface soil. This is tropical area. On the surface, you have black soil, but they cleaned it and then exposed this natural marl layer, and they used it as the first plaza floor. And then they dug this hole and then put these offerings and then put the same soil back. So it was very hard to see that cut. But so this belonged to really the beginning of Ceibal, around 1000 BC. So that made us happy, and then we went on to check the western building. So that was a little bit hard because we dug various places, but we never got to the oldest part. Finally, we decided to do tunneling. Basically, we tunnel through the buildings. So this is the pit where we found the cache, and then you see the pyramid in the back. So we started the tunnel from there. What we did is that we dig through this natural soil and then scrape the first plaza fill. So that's the first construction. So idea was if we follow that line, we eventually hit the Arias construction. So this is the tunnel excavation. So this is the tropics. It's very hot. You may think that if you go into tunnel, it may be cooler. Actually, it's hotter. It's like a sauna. So I decided to send one of my students into this excavation. So the student called Raul was digging there. And in the process, you may find cache in the ceiling of tunnel. So you have to dig in a sort of reverse way, and you have to improvise it, but that's what happened. Then Raul was digging whole season, didn't find anything. And the next season we went back, and he was digging and digging, and then finally we saw something. So this is the part of this flat plaza floor, original plaza floor. And then this marl layer will start to go up, as you see here. So this is the Arias construction. So Arias construction was really carved out of natural height in this area. Then we dug through, and then this is the central part. In the central part, on top of this natural marl layer, they put some fill. And then you see a beautiful floor here. That's the first construction. But it's only like a 2-meter high. It's pretty small building at the beginning. Then it was later built up. So that building dates to about 950 BC. So then we moved to the eastern side. We originally thought there's an early elongated building there, but our excavation shows that only dated to like 150 BC. Then the question was, where is the earlier building? Actually, we found the earlier building in the plaza area. Actually, all the building was buried under the plaza. So this is the earlier building. Again, it was carved out of the natural marl layer. So this is the view from the east. Again, they used the ramp, and it's only like a meter high. They just use stones to support the retaining wall of this building. Again, this dates to 950 BC. So it looks like this. The original building, the western building was under the pyramid, and the eastern building was under the plaza. The original, this is the original E group configuration of Ceibal. It was pretty low building, and then as you see here, it was very open shape. So it was very inclusive space where many community members could come. And then originally, those buildings are not pyramid. It was just a low kind of stage for public performance. There's not much difference between the main performer and the rest of the audience in terms of this positioning and then the status. So then that went well. Then we started to dig the platform. And we went to the southern platform. And we originally dug there, but we couldn't get to the bottom because it was very deep. So we decided to make this big pit of 10 by 8 meters. And it took us almost 4 years to complete this excavation. Again, this is in the tropical area. There's lots of bugs and mosquitoes. And then when you go to those deep pits, you may think there may be less mosquitoes. Actually, you have more mosquitoes in the pit. So I decided to send in one of my graduate students here called Victor. And then Victor was digging here for years. And then finally, he got to the natural level and then found the Arias building. So this is the final form. Victor is here. And then at the bottom, you have the original building on top of natural soil, again dating to 950 BC. Then you see the many layer floor construction. Then by around 800, it went to reach the height of about 5 meters. And then it was almost 30 meter wide. So by that time, they had really a monumental construction. There's another building, another platform, this northeastern part called East Court. So we dug there too. There, my wife, Daniela Triadan, was working. So if I say, you go there and dig, and then she's going to kick me. So you have to be very careful. So then we excavate here. And then Danny found this early remain of building you see here, dating to about 800 BC. We did various trenches and excavation. It's almost 5 meter deep, so you cannot expose them completely. But looking at the pattern, it was probably this kind of patio group. That's a typical arrangement of residential group for Maya people. So probably this was the Arias residential group occupied probably by the emergent elite. So we can reconstruct now this pattern. Originally we had the Arias element with E group and then southeastern platform. Around 800 BC, the E group was expanded, and then we have northeastern platform that was elite residential complex. Then around 600 or so, we have complete form of Chiapas pattern with those platforms. So this pattern really doesn't show that it was planted by direct foreign influence. It seems to show really natural growth of this pattern, partly locally. Then important data came from LiDAR, which we did 2 years ago. As many of you may know, LiDAR penetrates through this canopy. This is the central part of Ceibal with reconstructed temple, and then rest is covered by rainforest. The LiDAR, this is the profile of LiDAR view. You see that all those measurements of the temple and the vegetation, and then some point penetrate through the vegetation and then give you the idea of the ground level. So then, when we look at this central part, this was mapped by Harvard. It's a very good map, but when you see in LiDAR, you get a little bit different image. This is the same area. You see, it looks like this. As you see in the Harvard map, it looks like a sort of amorphous phase, this big plateau. But in LiDAR, it comes out in a very nicely organized straight edge and then clear rectangular form. So it was very nicely planned form. It's from top to, from here, from this part to northern end, it's almost 600 meter long. So it was enormous construction. Our excavation shows that the most of this huge plateau was built during the Preclassic period. So they put lots of work to build this thing. So then, I said this was done not from direct influence from Olmec. This can be shown in terms of dates too. Those are radiocarbon dates that we took, and then we ran the Bayesian analysis. Each line shows a single date, probability distribution. And this bottom one comes from the original construction of E group. And if we take out those old wood, they mainly concentrate around 950 BC. The next construction is slightly later, like a 980. So it looks pretty good. This is the eastern building of East structure, E group. There, it was carved out of natural soil. So we took the dates from those accumulation in the back of this building. So it's more a little bit dispersed, but earlier dates are around 950. And then there are continuous use around that area. So this shows that really Ceibal E group was built around 950. Then when we look at Venta chronology has been a major problem in Mesoamerican archaeology, but we analyzed the available radiocarbon dates from the center. Then what's interesting is that during Puente period, there's not much construction at La Venta. Most of dates construction happened in the peripheral area. So there's a pretty much dispersed settlement before 800 BC. La Venta was not the big center. Then next period, which is the Franco phase, that's after 800 BC, there are lots of construction started at La Venta, and all those dates come from the center part of La Venta. So La Venta became big center around 800 BC after the original development of Ceibal. So original development of Ceibal could not have happened under the influence of La Venta. So as I said, this is the E group. That should be the center of community performance ceremony, which is shown by many those offerings and deposits that we found. Again, they concentrate along the east-west axis line. Those are the caches we found, all with those greenstone axes or other objects. So when we see Chiapas Center, like La Venta, typical pattern is this cruciform arrangement. But I can show that actually this four configuration came a little bit later, which also tells us that the La Venta is later than initial development of Ceibal. At Ceibal before 850, many of them are not in cruciform shape, like this flat shape or flower petal shape. This is a little bit cruciform, but not true cruciform because it was not defined by axis. The next period, around 800, we still have those flat positioning of axis and then flower petal shape. And then we also have this what's called the Olmec spoon, which is basically pectoral. So this shows that they did this communal ceremony, but there are certain individuals who could wear this kind of special object. And then those objects were deposited in a communal ritual. Then after 800, we start to see this cruciform pattern. Those are the types that you find at La Venta and then Chiapas centers. Some of them are pretty elaborate. That's one of the cruciform cache with axis. And then this form of jade object. Again, this is pectoral. You see this perforation. Somebody was wearing it. So those might be emergent elite. And then they had this pointed, what we call perforator. The theory says that they poke male genital within the bloodletting ceremony. But we haven't tried it. And if you want to try it, you're welcome to do it. But then we have this kind of object, shows the really the close connection with Olmec centers. That comes from later period. Okay. So let me go over this timeline again. Before 1000 BC, during the early Preclassic period, there was a center of San Lorenzo. In Maya lowlands, there's almost nothing in terms of archaeological site. People are doing mixed economy, living pretty highly mobile way of life. But San Lorenzo area, there's already this tradition of cache deposit with greenstone axis, but it was not in a cruciform pattern. It was in those flat position or flower petal shape like this. Then San Lorenzo collapsed around 1100 BC or so. Then there's a power vacuum after the collapse of San Lorenzo before the rise of La Venta. And then during this power vacuum in the Olmec area, interesting things happens. Ceibal emerged, and then some Chiapas center emerged. And then Ceibal started to do this kind of deposit, and then like in Chiapas, Finca, Acapulco had the original shape of Chiapas pattern. So there's an important interaction in this area from Ceibal, Chiapas to Gulf Coast area. And then through this interregional interaction, this new form of spatial organization and the new form of ritual was emerging. Then around 800 BC, this pattern spread. Now we have fully developed Chiapas pattern, and then La Venta is now a major center. And then now we see fully developed Chiapas pattern with these cruciform chassis. Okay. Then, so in that sense, the important change happened 1000 BC. That was not instigated by Olmec centers. Then what was the major factor? I think the major factor is the maize agriculture. I cannot go into detail here, but the maize has been around for thousands of years. But maize has been always relatively small part of diet. But around 1000 BC, probably maize became a very productive plant. Then lots of people started to commit to the fully established maize agriculture. That happened probably around 1000 BC. Then we start to see the emergence of Maya communities like Ceibal. So let me look at the local process at Ceibal a little bit more closely. So there's a major transformation around 1000 BC, but social change doesn't happen so quickly. So we see that some slower process in terms of changing social organization. So around 1000 BC, we have this central E group and then this platform. So only construction, only archaeological evidence from this period come from this area. But there has to be people who built those things. Who are those people? We don't find any archaeological evidence outside. But I think there were people living outside. They are probably doing still very mobile way of life, still doing lots of hunting, gathering, and then many people may not have used ceramics. Then it's very hard to find remains of those people in the tropical area. When we get to around 800 or 700 BC, the central part expands. Outside, we start to have some remains of ceramics in those groups, but we still don't find the permanent construction outside of Ceibal epicenter. So actually, I think people are starting to settle down, but still they maintained high mobility during this period. So those are some of the remains from that period. So after we dig through those radar construction, we found those postholes on the bedrock. So those ephemeral buildings may have been used for 2-3 years, and then people moved out to the next place. So people maintain that kind of residential mobility. The fixed, more permanent construction started appear around 600 BC in the form of these stone platforms. And then a little bit before, we start to have burials in those areas, which is also tied to this process of settling down. So when we get to 600 BC or so, the Ceibal Center expanded furthermore, and then we found many more remains outside in those areas of red circle. Blue circle means that we excavated those areas, but we didn't find any remains from this period. Okay. So by this time, people are settling down pretty much, but some people may have been still moving around. So this process took several centuries. And then also important data come from LiDAR outside of Ceibal. So we did a LiDAR survey of 20 by 20 kilometers around Ceibal in this area. So this is the area covered by LiDAR. And then we found almost 15,000 architectural remains. Many of them date to classic period, like this way. But looking at these patterns, we can sort of reconstruct the chronological process. At the beginning, we think that there's just Seibao, although we haven't really tested outside, but really there's no indication that the Arya occupation were outside of Seibao. So there's this ceremonial construction in Seibao, and then people are still moving around in this outside area without building permanent structures, and then doing still lots of hunting gathering. Around 600 BC, we start to see E-groups popping out many places around Seibao. E-groups are indicated by those red dots. We excavated some of them date to about 600 BC. And then we see sort of semi-E-group, not so formalized groups also. Those are indicated by purple and then blue dot. So this time they are building those ceremonial building many places. That's probably again related to this process of settling down. As many people started to adopt maize agriculture, they really have to figure out new form of land ownership and then property ownership, and then rule of inheritance. And then through this process, there's probably lots of this social negotiation happening. And then in this process, this ceremonial building were built in those communities as a mark of probably the claim for that area. So let me summarize these patterns. So at the beginning, before early Preclassic period, before 1000 BC, we don't have really much archaeological evidence, but we think the Maya lowlands was very sparsely occupied, and then people are doing pretty much mixed economy. People are pretty highly mobile. So we don't know much about this society, but looking at ethnographic data of similar societies, we can guess that this kind of group had a relatively weak sense of property ownership. The domestic groups are not really clearly demarcated, or king group are not very clearly demarcated. Possibly those groups had what may be called domestic and the public sphere pretty much merged together without a clear division. But 1000 BC, there's a major change. Maize possibly became productive, and then some people started to adopt maize agriculture, but not everybody. There are many people who are still maintaining traditional way of life. But with this initial change, there's an important change. The people started to negotiate new form, new concept of land ownership, property ownership, and then inheritance. And then with that, domestic groups became more demarcated corporate groups. And then king group became also very much more demarcated. With this, you will see the emergence of more demarcated domestic sphere. With that, we see the emergence of new form of public sphere tied to new form of ceremonial configuration and then ceremonial practice, which is reflected in this early remains from Seibao. So now we see domestic sphere and the public sphere separated, and I would imagine this public ceremony was an important field of political negotiation in which those people who are living different way of life with different level of mobility and then different subsistence practices get together and then share common experience, and then partly consciously, partly unconsciously shaping the course of new form of community. Then after 800 BC, those formalized E-groups started to appear in various small communities. That shows that probably this new form of maize agriculture, sedentary way of life, and the new form of land ownership was being accepted by many people. And then probably this kind of ceremonial buildings had an important role in this kind of change. And then public ritual was more elaborate by this time. And then the elite, emergent elite, was playing central role in this kind of public performance. Some of them could wear those precious maize ornament, and then those people are depositing these ornament in this kind of public ceremonies. So in this sense, this public ceremony and then this more demarcated domestic sphere was really shaping the nature of political authority in Maya society. So early days, people thought that this kind of elaborate ritual, elaborate ceremonial construction appear after people establish sedentary way of life. Then you have village, and then village grows, then you start to have more elaborate temples. But it's not like that. Actually, a new form of ceremony, new form of spatial configuration appear at the beginning of this change, while other people are still figuring out which way they're going to go. Actually, that's not unique to Maya area. Actually, when we look at the other part of the world, we see the similar pattern. Famous case is the Peru, like those pre-ceramic temples of Kotosh, and then now we have even earlier example from Callao, from the coastal area. Basically, those are done in the initial part of this agricultural development when people are not using ceramics yet. In American Southeast, there's this famous site of Poverty Point, when people are doing still hunting and gathering. Now we have even earlier site of Watson Break and the other sites where people build enormous mound when they are doing hunting and gathering. Those things can be built by those pretty much hunter-gatherer people. And then a remarkable example come from Near East, this from Turkey, this site of Göbekli Tepe, which dates to about 9,000 BC, which is really the beginning of people still pretty much hunter-gatherers. It's some transition to agriculture was happening, but in this area, people are pretty much still mobile, not sedentary. But they built this very impressive, this stone cycle with elaborate stone sculpture. So this kind of thing can happen at the beginning. So those changes are important. And as I said, this kind of ceremonial configuration that happened at the beginning in the Maya area pretty much shaped the later form of Maya political authority. And then later Maya rulers were very established, but still their main role was to performance in this kind of public ceremony. Then you may ask why you don't have this kind of pattern in the Near East. Partly because I think this kind of timeline is probably important. For the Near Eastern people, you have this kind of ceremonial construction, but then you have thousands of years before the emergence of rulers. And then also the pattern is a little bit similar in Peru and Andes. But in Maya area, it happened so late, and 1000 BC, and then they could take some model of rulership and the political organization from Olmec, although they didn't get the direct influence from Olmec. Then the emergence of Maya ruler is only like 800 years after from the beginning of this initial change. It's a very quick transition. And in that sense, Maya ruler retained the original role of this emergent elite coming from this southern BC also. Thank you very much.